Okay, we have arrived at Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, which is the second in the trilogy flowing directly from The Happiest Days of Our Lives, and the fantasy continues. This is another segue, actually the last in a series. Now, I understand why some of you suggested that I treat Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 and The Happiest Days of Our Lives as one unit, but I chose not to because they are distinctly different musically, and ideologically they point to different moments, different stages of the story. I read that this song has often been adopted as an anarchistic anthem, and because of this interpretation, in 1980 in South Africa, it was banned from being played in public. And then in the US, many teachers petitioned various radio stations to stop broadcasting it. And even the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was once quoted saying that she hated it. But all of these efforts for suppression, as well as the use of it to promote anarchy, are, in my opinion, a mistake and a big misunderstanding of what is really going on in this song. I think they got it all wrong. And I'll come back to that soon. Both the lyrics and the music are well done. So they can each stand on their own, and they work together in well-crafted design to achieve the song's purpose. And just as I said in the first listen, there really is no art in it. No real, deep, personal connection. It is entirely unimaginative. Just a mindless, numbing chant to connect people through the most effective and base emotional reaction existing in that environment, which is revolt. And the pulse in the percussion highlights the protest march-like rhythm of the chant. How does this music achieve this effect? Well, it's really very simple. Take a stupid phrase, such as, "We don't need no education." Chant it until you find its inherent rhythm and melody. We don't need no education. Strip it down to its most unmusical form. Place a deadly, repetitive beat under it. Choose the most boring harmonization. And there you are. But we can make it even more compelling by adding one more thing. A bass line, which, if it were developed, would be brilliant. But instead, it never goes anywhere. It's just repeating itself over and over and over, essentially driving home the realization that there was opportunity. There was musical potential. But it was stunted before it ever could grow into something worthwhile. Now, remember the way The Happiest Days of Our Lives builds in intensity until it climaxes in a revelation of the full cycle of abuse in society. And that is the point at which we transition to this part 2 of Another Brick in the Wall. In the movie, there's a scene of the teacher abused by his wife, intersected for some split seconds with scenes of the same teacher beating the children. This is how The Happiest Days of Our Lives ends. But it's not a song ending as we expect it to be. Instead, we move directly into the next song. And this transition is made by a high-pitched sound, kind of resembling a scream, a cry. And then, in the movie, we see the children marching. Of course, the setup is symbolic. The children in line marching towards school to a beat. And do notice the walls. They're made of brick, which are present everywhere in this clip. These children enter the school and come out the other side. But this time, on the other side, the setup has changed. It's now a factory-style assembly line. Every child sitting at a desk, void of their personality, wearing these faceless, grotesque masks, which have featured in earlier songs. It is an institution which is supposed to elevate, educate, and enhance, but instead, uniformity is produced. Next, we see the school as a maze in which the children keep on marching under the strict supervision of the schoolmaster. He has the look of a dominating military officer who is there only to bark orders and ensure that everyone stays in line. This idea, again, is brought in from earlier in the album. And the children do exactly what they are supposed to do, while he yells, "Wrong! Do it again!" These scenes reminded me of Orwell's vision of the future in 1984, or Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which is a silent 1927 black and white movie that shows factory workers marching submissively in a perfect uniformity. Kino International released the movie a few years ago, restored with 25 more minutes of newly discovered footage. Orwell gets a lot of credit and reference in our society for his foresight back in 1984. But personally, I deeply appreciate that Lang also recognized this path all the way back in 1927, which is quite a few years before his country started World War II. But let's go back and listen to the teacher's words for a moment, uttered with such smug glee, in my opinion. "Wrong! Do it again!" In other words, you failed. Repeat. No teaching. No instructing, helping, demonstrating. Just a constant drip of humiliating failure and the order to repeat. Again and again. Just like a machine. And machines can only create more machines. And then all of the instruments go silent for a while, except the drums, which are setting up the chant rhythm. As I said multiple times during my first listen, this song is intentionally designed to be without artistry. It's crude, dull, monotonous, unimaginative, repetitive, deadening, because the whole purpose of the music is to illustrate, to demonstrate what this kind of attitude, this kind of life achieves. It destroys all individuality, all creativity, sensitivity, and potential for development. At first glance, one might think that this song is promoting the ideology found within it. But the music tells us otherwise, because we simply can't endure it for long before we begin to feel numb and brain dead ourselves. It's crying out for something better, for something real, for something that gives reason to hope, or to try, and to achieve. By the very absence of any of this within the music, we are made to feel our need for it, to crave it. Listen to the voice at its first entrance. It's so heartless, hopeless, disenchanted, no sense of connection to life at all. It's soul-crushing. And then, when the children's voices enter, we rage and we weep because we are made to understand that this is happening at the exact period in life when it has the most long-lasting formative impact. You know, you can tear branches off a mature tree. You can even cut it to the ground if you wish, and it will still spring up from the roots. But when you take a small sprout, when it's still tender and delicate, and you start trimming and cutting and hacking at it, provided it doesn't totally die, it ends up being deformed for life. And that is what we find in these words. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. Notice that in both the happiest days of our lives, as well as this part 2 of Another Brick in the Wall, there's no singular pronoun used. None. It's the children, or the kids, or simply we, us. It's a collective cry coming from the subjects of this systemic oppression. Of course, we remember, this is all being recollected in Pink's memory, but it's going far beyond his own case. It's disclosing the fate of countless never realized, to borrow from later in the album, bleeding hearts and artists. Now, I was talking with Vlad about this song and the lyrics, and he had an interesting thought about the grammatical structure of this chant. We don't need no education. It's the use of the double negative, don't and no. And his idea was that since a second negative cancels the first, it's actually saying we need education. Well, of course, on closer examination, that doesn't quite hold up, because the next phrase certainly shouldn't be interpreted as needing thought control. But you have to remember that English is his second language, and although I can't quite get on board with that interpretation of the lyrics, my personal view ends up taking me to the same place in the end, namely that this is a cry for the real thing. And that is why I think that those who called for or instituted bans against this song and all the backlash and haters of it actually don't get it right, don't understand its message. And here's why I hold this view. Anyone who is natively familiar with the English language will probably recognize that this type of speech, we don't need no, other than when appearing in a regional colloquial context, it is only used by the most uneducated portions of the population. And in this song, it is used in that way, as an expression of ignorance and stupidity, demonstrating the very need of what is being proclaimed as unnecessary. So, by painting us a picture of ignorance in this manifesto cry, Waters is implicitly communicating the need for this very thing, education. And by juxtaposing this word education with thought control, we're pointed to the real culprit, which is something masquerading as education, that is, in actuality, totally anathematic to the true thing. Referring back to the movie again, there are walls or bricks everywhere. And looking both backward and forward through the album, again, the message is clear. Total alienation. Not just removal from what is so hurtful, but also from all that could help to take them out of this hellish place, including real education, the true development of intellect, understanding, and emotional and relational capacity. Instead, children endlessly marching in lines. The lines separated by walls, and over it all, certain teachers. These teachers are also symbolic, because of course, it's not only under the influence of schoolroom instructor where a child learns or is taught. And so all who teach a child these things, who lay bricks and build the wall, are held responsible for the future consequences by this song. In the movie, scenes from The Happiest Days of Our Lives with the principal mocking Pink for his poems flash back while we continue to trace the two major consequences of this treatment. The first, the repression of individuality. In the movie, the children are transported by the factory-style belt and thrown into a meat grinder, really a horrific scene, where they are all combined into the same sort of, some kind of meat-like, ground-up worms. Their personality is permanently dead, unrecoverable. They are finally the desired consistency for the final desired product. Peons, ready to obey, easy to manipulate, and easy to shape into whatever packaging is chosen for them. Now, I know this is in some ways a stretch, but I don't think that my conclusion is far wrong. If you've watched this channel, you probably know that quite early in my journey, I listened to Hey You. That was my first exposure to Pink Floyd. But it comes quite a bit later on in this album, and since I've already done the first listen and in-depth for that track, I won't be redoing it as part of this project. But if you've watched it, you'll remember I had questions about the meaning of the phrase, "the worms ate into his brain." If you haven't watched it, you can check the link. That music and those lyrics, of course, came before the movie. So I want to be careful to not apply too much interpretive hindsight here. But this clip of the end product, these extruded ground meat worms, triggered my thinking a little bit. And now that I've listened to the whole album, including Waiting for the Worms, I do think it is at least acceptable to equate this brainless, mindless, conglomerate mass of humanity that used to be human to the worms which come later in the album. Let me know what you think, because I am open to correction, but for now, I think it fits. The second major consequence, due to the lack of true education, is a dangerous mass of people. And we all know that. These children are not capable of responding in a meaningful, positive, or constructive way to the tyranny they live under simply because they are not educated. They don't have the tools. And the chaos breaks. They erupt in revolt, destroying absolutely everything. This anarchical chant type of protest offers no solution to the problem. In their fury, they destroy, rip off, burn to the ground, but they cannot build. They cannot do something constructive. This song says no to both extremes. No to brainwashing and no to ignorance, which, if we follow the logic, results in a positive yes to real education. In that sense, I can agree with Vlad's take on the grammar. This revolt builds in intensity to the point where we see the children ready to throw the teacher into the flames. And then, in an instant, we are brought back to reality. All these images, visions, were nothing but the thoughts triggered in Pink's imagination as he reflected on his abusive childhood teacher. And we see him rubbing his hand. His mind is starting here to go down the slope, and this is just the beginning of the slide. In the music album, we come close to the end of the song and begin to hear the principal yelling to the children again and again. If you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? And this is pointing back to his own experience at home, where his wife forces him to eat even what he was not comfortable with. Again, I take it as symbolic. And what does this represent? This system is based on submission. You will get rewarded only if and only when you do what you're required to do, even if you don't like it, even if it doesn't make sense to you, even if it's absolutely wrong. The circle of abuse and oppression goes on, just as the young pupil who was once abused by teachers is now a teacher abusing the next generation, which will in turn become teachers only to abuse their pupils down the line. As the song comes to an end, and we hear the principal's frenetic words repeated over and over, and the children's noise, and then, little by little, the phone ringing sound. It's coming from a distance, but it's the same sound that we hear at the end of Young Lust, which is the 9th song on the album. And it seems to be telling us that we have arrived at the end of a phase of Pink's life. There's no segue here. We've arrived at the end of a full chapter in the book. And when we move on, it will be to a new phase, to the next brick in the wall. I'll see you next time.